I would do a talk, and because Kim and I speak so much about the GPL and how it relates to WordPress, that was her suggestion.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about WordPress, open source, and the GPL. So, you know, don't fall asleep. I like it, I'm passionate about it, but it's a little dry subject. So who am I and why am I talking about this? Good. So basically, oh no, that sucks. The notes are bad, sorry. So basically, before I got involved in WordPress, and sorry about the tinge on the thing. Oh, I didn't point that out. Let me go back. If you want to do the slides yourself, it's Sal's suggestion. The link is up there. It's what is it? tdpl.cc/wclvpa. But back to what I was going to talk about. So before I got involved in WordPress, I worked on Microsoft products. I was a Microsoft Systems Administrator, SQL Server, Exchange, all of that stuff. And two things really happened. I started to see that proprietary systems were not the way of the future, and I got sucked into WordPress. And I started with WordPress and open source around 2006 and 2007, and I've been working on the community team since its inception. And that's kind of important for this talk because it's kind of how I got involved in the GPL. Because I got on the community team because I was the lead organizer of WordCamp New York City, and I was in charge of, what's that called, sponsorship. And we had to raise a boatload of money because New York's expensive. And there were rules about how much we could charge for sponsorships. And in order to raise enough money to do a WordCamp in New York, the math just didn't work. So the only thing I could do was join the global community team to change those limits from inside. So I had a problem, I had to fix it, I got involved in the team, and I've not escaped yet. And because of my background, I ended up working on sponsors, which led to GPL, trademarks, and then budgets, because I have a financial background. And I have contributed to a number of multiple source projects in the last 10 years. WordPress, obviously, not code contributing, but this contributing. PHP way back due to a somewhat busy board forum that Laura had. And Civi CRM, which is a CRM that works with WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, and Backdrop. So I've gotten familiar with that. So talking about WordPress, so how does all of this relate to WordPress? So I want to talk about open source and the GPL from a WordPress perspective. So I'm not sure who I've got in here because I want to kind of freewheel it a little bit. So who's familiar with the GPL? Who's heard of it? Knows what it is? Who believes it's important? Okay, all right. So what I really like is when I go to the WordPress.org site, the first thing we see on Meet WordPress is, yeah, I know, it's terrible, I'm sorry, the monitor, but WordPress is open source software. So the first thing you see on that, Meet WordPress, it's open source software. So that's their main real estate. They get to say anything they want. The first thing they're going to highlight is that WordPress is open source. When you go to download WordPress, you see priceless and free. So we've got the free open source software right in their first 2 pages that most people are going to get. Then where I tie it together with this is we talk about WordPress's motto of democratizing publishing. We've heard that. And their mission speaks to that it's software for everyone, and to democratize publishing, they support the freedoms that come with open source. So how do we tie all this together, and why is it important to us? So when I think about open source, I think about 2 things. The Free Software Foundation, okay? So Free Software Foundation, founded about 1985, Richard Stallman, and that's where the GPL comes out of. So this is an association that is dedicated to free software, and WordPress points to it on its website as what is, where its source of freedoms. The Open Source Initiative is the other association that upholds the open source principles, free software, and these two bodies, these two nonprofits, are pretty much where we look to for our license information, what's open source, what's free. So when I think about open source philosophies, the two sites give us the quotes that I like to talk about. Free software is having control over the technology we use everywhere. And it's for individual and communal benefit, not for proprietary software. That's right on the About page of the Free Software Foundation. Open source software enables a development method for the software that harnesses the power of peer review. Because if the software is open source, we can all read the code. And there are amazing benefits that come with that. And one of the most important activities of the Open Source Initiative is to have a standards body to define what open source is and how it works. Because if we have this software, we need some sort of governance, because how else are we going to not only understand, but enforce? This all comes together with the GPL. So WordPress's basic page is they call it the new public license. It's the new general public license. And that is what WordPress is licensed under, GPL v2 or later officially. What's really neat about this page is that that WordPress speaks, links to its license, of course, talks about the Free Software Foundation, but then calls out Drupal. Right on the WordPress About page. Yeah, I know. Okay? They link to the Drupal GPL v2 page. We actually talked about this back when I got involved in the community team of whether we needed to do our own or to remove this. But in the end, it was like, well, no, they wrote a really good one. And in the spirit of open source, why would we want to remove that page? Because both projects are GPL v2, and both projects have the same philosophy on derivative works. And this paragraph was actually added a little bit later, and it actually states, I'll read a bit since it's so blurry with the slides. There's some legal gray area regarding what is considered a derivative work. Okay, so if we've ever heard the phrase 100% GPL bandied about, has anybody in here heard of that? Okay, what is that? Is that a legal phrase? No. That's a WordPress core value, or at least a WordPress.org core value, that the code that derives from WordPress must be 100% GPL. What does that mean? It means that if you write a plugin or a theme, any product that is derivative of WordPress, everything that you distribute must be GPL. It's not just that you're going to attribute the functions you took from it, not just the CSS, not just the PHP, everything. So that even includes that you're going to make available your images and whatnot, which is a super gray area. And if you have a plugin up on the repo and then you have a paid plugin, if you're going to follow this philosophy, everything has to be 100% GPL. So what's the GPL? Okay, it's basically the most widely used free software license, and it gives users the freedom to run, study, share, and modify the software. Sal spoke about this a little bit this morning on what we could do. It was, as I said before, with Richard Stallman, was the original author, and it grants the authors all versions of the GPL, because GPL v2 is what WordPress uses. GPL v3 was written 10 years later, and it expands it a bit. but it gives the users the basic freedoms and the rights of the free software definition. And importantly, unlike a music license, and that's what I'm tying back in, where Sal has the copyright and anyone has to attribute anything they change to that back to you, we have a copyleft license. So what we end up having is that if I take Sal's plugin and I make a copy of it and I change it, I can actually release that with proper attribution, with the code that I add, and then it's my plugin that has his plus my stuff. So it's a little different than the music license that we spoke of. Oh, okay. I messed up the slides. I'm really, really bad at slides, so I'm doing my best with these. So I really want to go back to when we talk about the GPL and the WordPress project, and if you've ever seen Matt Mullenweg in an interview, and he's asked about the GPL and the power of WordPress, he refers back to the 4 essential freedoms. And the cornerstone of free open source software is if the software has these 4 essential freedoms. And it's the freedom to run the program any way you wish. The freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does what you want, so you can customize it. And in the GPL, access to the source code is a cornerstone of this, because how can you modify it if you don't have the source code? You have the freedom to redistribute copies of the software. So once you have the software, you can redistribute it. So when we talk about, I'll probably get into a little bit more, paid plugins and plugins behind a paywall and all those nuances, once I've got a paid plugin, if it comes with a GPL v2 or later license, I can redistribute that. Whether we like it or not, we can do that. That's one of the 4 freedoms. We can also redistribute copies of the modified versions to others. Again, we have to have the source code for that, but this is something we're allowed to do. We can modify the code and then redistribute that as well. So that's what we have, but I started to think, well, how does it actually work? How does this whole ecosystem work? How do we benefit? How do I want to explain it? So when I was up in Boston at a WordCamp last month, Angela Jin gave a talk on WordPress and the community, and she brought up GPL, and she mentioned that her colleague, from Hugh, because I can't say his name properly, talks about a cupcake analogy. Well, I don't like cupcakes, so I said, I like cookies. So I decided that the better way to do this was with cookies. So got my Cookie Monster out, and Cookie Monster is going to talk about how he forked the cookie the GPL way. So the start of this is Cookie Monster is given a cookie, and it's the most incredible chocolate chip cookie. And Big Bird had given it to him and said, "Try this, see if you like it." He goes nuts over it. It's amazing. It's the best thing he ever tasted. Then after about 2 dozen of them, he says, "It's almost perfect. It just needs a little something." So he goes to Big Bird and he says, "Can I have the recipe?" And Big Bird says, "Of course, here it is. And if you do make it better, let me know, because I want to incorporate that." So Cookie Monster reads the recipe. Well, he gets somebody to read it to him. And then he starts trying to figure out how to make a cookie. And he makes many cookies. And finally he finds it. He adds macadamia nuts. And the macadamia nuts makes the cookie perfect. I'm not the most creative person, it's all I can come up with. So he decides it's perfect. He brings it back to Big Bird. Big Bird agrees, and Big Bird adds Cookie Monster's changes to the recipe, to the original, and now they've actually collaborated on an open source recipe. Okay, I can see that happening all over. People trade recipes, they do it. It's a real interesting scenario of how that works comparative to software. Because it's not so much different from that, WordPress has put out a product. We download the source code and something doesn't work for us. And we decide that we can fix it or make it better. So we've downloaded the source code, we make a modification, we submit a patch, they merge it back in. No different than cookie recipe. But for comparison's sake, what would happen if we did this the proprietary or the non-GPL way? So once again, we'll keep it short. Cookie Monster gets a cookie from Big Bird. He thinks it's great. He goes nuts. It still needs something. He goes back to Big Bird for the recipe, but this time Big Bird says, oh, it's not my recipe. I got these cookies from Oscar the Grouch. So they both stand there for a minute and look. And Cookie Monster wanders over to Oscar and knocks on Oscar's can and says, can I have the recipe for the cookies? Oscar pops his head out. No, it's mine. Slams the lid. Cookie Monster walks away sad. He could reverse engineer the cookie, but he doesn't know where to start. He doesn't have the recipe. And that's really a challenge. And one of the things I look at a comparison is that if you have a program that's not open source and you want to create something similar, you've got to build it from scratch. So in this scenario, Cookie Monster would have to figure out this chocolate chip cookie from scratch, and he'll never do it because he's too busy eating the cookies to start from scratch. So that's how I understand the GPL and modifying, and it's just a scenario that I personally like. So then I said to myself, well, that's all nice, but why should I care? Why do we care that WordPress is GPL, that it's open source software? What are the benefits? So the benefits of open source in the GPL, to me, is the basic 4 freedoms. I have the ability to use the software, fix it, and change it. You can customize it. And and you have the right to do that to the software. If you don't like it, you can fix it. You can add to it. You can actually hire somebody to work on it for you, and then that person can do that for you and make it better. If you do an improvement, you can send it back to the open source project as an improvement, and they can accept it or not. If they don't accept it, you can fork the project, you can create your own based on that. And now you've got another project. And one of the things that doesn't get talked about much, but WordPress is a fork. WordPress started with B2 Cafe Log, and what was it, 2004? Okay, I'm bad on the years, I didn't look it up and I don't remember. But Matt Mullenweg went looking for people to help him fork the project because he didn't like where it was going. And he forked it and made WordPress. So we're all working on a forked project. WordPress itself could be forked. Anything is possible. But the GPL gives us this ability. What we also get the benefit of is it's open source. Anyone can read the source code. Anyone can modify it. It's what enables our plugin and theme system. How many people here have had to solve a problem on a WordPress site and I needed to do this? And we Google this. How many times have we found a plugin that does that? How many times have we found an article with a code snippet? It gives us a place to start because we're all sharing that code, we're all collaborating. And therefore, we don't have to keep going back to some proprietary software and begging them to add a feature. We can do it ourselves. Themes, the theme system. We're tying into the core software to create the theme system. It's the open source and GPL nature of WordPress that allows this. I like that it's not proprietary. So I want to think about a proprietary system, a real life example other than Cookie Monster. if you use a proprietary system, and it could be, a hosted web service where you're making your website on their service. You don't own that service, you have to use it their way, they own your data, all of the things we've heard before. You have to put in a feature request. You don't have control over your own destiny. You can't build it yourself, and you're stuck. You take it, it does what it does, and that's it. I don't know if anyone here has ever seen Aaron Campbell his talk on the open web. Has anybody seen that talk? So he's got the best example ever, at least for me. And you can go to WordPress.tv and look it up. But just to highlight this, I'll give a quick synopsis of his tractor story. Okay, so he talks about how farming has gotten so much more complicated over the decades that now the farmers, in order to produce the yields they do, they buy all this expensive machinery. And they're spending sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars on these tractors and other farm equipment. And they break. And it's not like a 72 Pontiac that you can open up and just replace the spark plug. It's completely computerized. And they've signed a license agreement with the tractor maker. So now they're not allowed to change the software. They're not allowed to fix this. They have to call in from the pictures he took, a John Deere representative, but the tractor rep, and they have to come in and fix it. Well, they have to wait for that person. So the farmers got together and figured out how to hack the system so that they could fix it themselves. They got sued. They lost. They're not allowed to fix their own systems. And that's a proprietary system. That's exactly what we're, in my mind, fighting against with WordPress. And it's what we call, and it's mentioned in both the OSI and the Free Software Foundation's mission statements, that we are going to prevent vendor lock-in. Because that's what they're doing with their software. They're trying to lock us in that we can only use them. By having open source software with a GPL license, we're not locked into anyone. We want to take our WordPress site and move it to something else. We have all the data. We can export it. We can do whatever we want to it. The other thing that I talk about is with open source, there's the potential for much better security. People are like, really? It's like, well, yeah. The projects are developed in the open. Everyone can see the code. And with many contributors, we have a better opportunity to both find and fix security vulnerabilities than otherwise. When you think about it, if you have a web browser, because Firefox is an open source web browser, and although it's nearly dead, Internet Explorer is not. Okay? How do you can read the source code for Firefox, you can determine what's going on, you can see what's there. Do we know what security vulnerabilities exist in Internet Explorer? Do we know what's going on? Do we look at what happens when they announce there's a serious 0-day patch that on Patch Tuesday Microsoft has to push out? No, it's all voodoo. We don't know what they fixed and what they haven't fixed. So it's a big difference. So from a security model, I believe open source has the ability to be more secure. Of course, be careful what you download. Don't just download anything, but use it judiciously. So, what about 26? So that's my overview of this. And now I want to kind of turn it more into a conversation. And because there might not be some questions, I actually have a few that I wrote myself. Because when I was talking through this talk, it was like, well, maybe we look at like an FAQ. And you've been dealing with WordPress and open source and GPL for so many years. What are the things you get asked all the time? So let's talk about it. If this software is free, how can anybody make any money? So how many of us have gone to sell a client on WordPress and say, I need a website and it's got to do these 8 things. And we look at it. We can build that for you. We're going to build it in WordPress. Like, well, what is this WordPress? Now, we don't get that so much anymore because it's so big. But why should I use WordPress? What is this open source? It's free. I don't understand. So you can make money on it because certainly many of us in this room that I know charge for their services. They're charging the fee to implement that site. You can also charge for the code. GPL v2 allows us to charge for the code. Once you charge, and your user has it, for lack of a better word, your user, your client, they now have the freedoms that GPL gives them, so they can do anything they wish with it, within reason. They can modify it, they can redistribute it, they can change it and re-release it, but assuming we're following the WordPress product and derivative rules, they now have those freedoms. That's a powerful thing. But it doesn't prevent software from being paid for, or behind a paywall. I vet a lot of companies for WordCamps, and we'll look at a company like Gravity Forms or WooCommerce. Can you download Gravity Forms without paying?
No.
No. Can you download a WooCommerce add-on without paying? No. I mean, they'll give you the money back really fast if you don't like it, but you've got to pay them the money to download. Paywalls are allowed. But once you have that code, that's it. You've got it. You can use it for whatever you wish. What don't you get? Okay? You don't get support and updates. So if you want the next version of Gravity Forms, you better be on a subscription or you're not going to be able to download it again. But you still have that code. I've also been asked, how does copyright work with all this? Kim's written some code, she contributes it up to WordPress. Doesn't she have the copyright on her code? Yeah, she does. But she's got the copyright on that code under the GPL license. So that what happens is that she's agreed that her code can be released under GPL v2 and redistributed. That's why some projects are stuck on GPL v2. I don't know if anyone remembers, but early on when I got in WordPress, there was a big conversation. Can WordPress move to GPL v3? Because it's a much cleaner license, it's a much more clear license. And the answer was yes, but no. Yes, because you can change the license of a software product, but no, because they'd have to write to and get approval from every single contributor that ever put as much as a comment into WordPress to change the license.
Wow.
Okay, so, that's how it does it. I think I covered on the security tab, if anyone can read the code, can't they hack me? Now we're back to keep your own security best practices. WordPress core is secure, and in my opinion, and the crowdsourcing is what is best. Can I restrict how people use an open source licensed program? And that depends on your license. The basic answer is no, you can't. Once they have it, they can use it. In researching this, there is a license called Do No Evil. Yeah, okay. And that license has, this software can be used for any purpose except do no evil. I forget the exact word, I didn't pull it. But I've never seen that tested. I don't know how it would work. There are really crazy licenses. There's even one free software license out there called the WTF license. And the license basically reads, do WTF you want with this. And that's it. Totally simplified. Most people use the GPL2, GPL v3. Can I take code? Can I strip the copyright? So Sal wrote, I love his Stop Emails plugin, okay? So he wrote that plugin. Can I download that, strip out the copyrights, put my name up on there, and sell that as my own? No. He'd have a really good case on the copyright. And so that he could then come after me for violating the copyright. And that's been done before. If you remember the copyright and the no attribution, Does anyone remember the WordPress thesis debates?
Yeah, I remember that. I don't
Okay,
know.
so basically, Thesis was a really, really popular theme plugin when WordCamps were just starting to really get big. And they were not GPL. And they got into kind of a fight, the owner of Thesis and Matt. And so what ends up happening is somebody from the core team bought the darn thing and downloaded it. And the lead developers of WordPress went through it and started, hey, there's my code. Hey, there's my code. There's my typo. I spelled that word wrong. It's wrong in WordPress. It's wrong there. This is a derivative product. He's violating the license because he was contending that he didn't have any WordPress code in Thesis. He was only using the functions, add action, apply filters, that he didn't have to do it. And I wouldn't say WordPress won, but WordPress sure wore them down, okay? And so the attribution is really critical because you can't strip the copyrights out. Does the GPL require that the source code of modified versions be posted to the public? No. If you modify the code, you don't have to post it to the public. Best example I come up is WordCamp.org. Has modified code that is not open sourced. It's GPL. And if you can get to that code, then you can do anything with it. But there's you can't get to that code. So you can modify it. So when you do a client project, you don't have to release that to the public. You take a theme, you take underscores is a great example that I heard mentioned today, and you make a theme out of underscores, call it my client theme. You don't have to distribute that. Okay? There's nothing that forces you to distribute that code. If you distribute that code, that's where the extra provisions in the 4 freedoms come in, because now we've got to make sure you have the attribution and you've got to comply with the license. And then what does distribution mean? What does it mean to distribute the code? And it's basically to make it publicly available for download, even if it's behind a paywall. Okay? Because if you have a big download link, even if it's blocked by give me $49.99 to download it, you're distributing the code. You're offering it up. And that's the key to so many of the provisions there. And my last question that I get asked all the time from a WordCamp perspective is, what is this derivative work thing and how does it apply and what are some examples? And what WordPress takes the position is that any plugin or theme is a derivative work in its entirety. We could sit here and debate that. I actually don't know that I want to, because there's areas where I'm not sure that I agree with that. But that is what the program is. And how that works, what can WordPress do with this mythical unicorn of 100% GPL? What can they actually do for enforcement? So somebody writes a plugin, or better yet, a theme. They've taken code and they include, say, PSD artwork, okay? That they're going to distribute to people who buy this theme so that they could actually, put their design and have basically the raw design files. And their license says that all the PHP code, JavaScript, and CSS is GPL v2 or v2. All images and PSD files belong to us. Are they violating the GPL? WordPress will say yes. What will they do? Technically, the only thing they can do is if that theme author wants to present themselves at a WordCamp in any official capacity, they're not supposed to be allowed. What other penalties can there be? I've never figured out one. I've never seen one. I've never seen a lawsuit over this. But that's the way WordPress interprets a derivative work. So those are the most common questions. So now, any questions about this talk and my ramblings on GPL? Sure.
To follow up on that theme, I heard too that like when you pay for a theme and you download it and it says, this is good for you to use or yourself or for one customer.
Yep.
But because of the open source, I believe that's not true, that you can use it multiple times.
Yep. So that's a great question, and that should have been on my frequently asked. I love that. So yeah, a lot of times what I find is that the theme authors and even plugin authors don't understand the GPL, and what most of them are trying to say is, here's the code, download it and use it, but I'm only supporting you on one site. And if they're doing that, that's okay. Because they don't have to, if you take that code and install it on 100 sites and try to open 100 support tickets, they're gonna say no. If they actually tell you or put something in the code that cripples it, that won't let it work on the second site because it phones home, there's some code there, that's against the GPL. Okay, and that's something that from the team I work on, we really look at.
So does that include like, you must enter the license key here and it counting the number and rejecting it if it doesn't?
That's on plugins more usually.
Yeah,
but like
does it include that? If you don't put it in, what happens? Does the plugin just stop working, or
then you can't update it?
if you you're not entitled to updates. You're only entitled to the use of the code.
But are you entitled to download it from your other thing and then upload it to there?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I thought.
I do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Go on.
I guess I want to bring up, so I understand the idea of the GPL and being able to make money, and so the examples we saw, people are making money with services.
Yep.
But the idea of selling code and putting it behind a paywall, I have trouble with this, right?
Yep.
If you have a commercial plugin and someone pays to download it, and then so I pay for a commercial plugin and I download it, I should be able to distribute it.
Absolutely.
And so I should be able to put that on my website with a download link, and anyone should be able to download it from me, because I can distribute this.
I agree.
However, there's been lawsuits about that because people argue trademark law, because they say this is our trademarked name that you were posting up here, and so you can't give out our code to be downloaded underneath our trademark name. It's not true.
That's a valid thing that I have not come across. That's great. Okay.
So you have to rename that.
No. I've not run across that. I kind of find that interesting. Okay.
I'm almost certain that
No, I'm not
happened
saying
with Delicious Brains with
Okay.
WP Migrate DB Pro, where someone had that and was putting it out, and that they argued that they were infringing on their trademark in terms of their name, and I think perhaps
I've seen copyright claims where they don't attribute properly, and when they do that, so that could also be true.
So I believe it was a case where it was, here's the plugin locked up and being shipped out, which I think is a weakness in the GPL that we don't acknowledge.
And it
right?
is a weakness and it's also a weakness, or it's also, for the open source projects that I work on, WordPress is unique on the number of paid plugins, themes in our ecosystem. In working on Drupal through the CRM project, the people that I run into, they won't go near anything that's paid. Now there are paid Drupal modules, okay, there are paid Joomla extensions, but nowhere near the number as WordPress, obviously, because where can you make all the money? Is with WordPress. It's why Jesse James robbed the bank. It's where the money is. No, I'd like to see that, because I agree. This is the weakness in the GPL. What I do like, I actually like the AGPL v3 license better than ours, because one of the tenets of that license is that the source code must be publicly downloadable, and that you must provide a download link to your software. And that license makes it so difficult to put a module, a plugin, a theme behind the paywall. Yeah, but it is a flaw. I agree with you. I haven't heard about Delicious Brains. I'll look into that.
Would that have prevented the growth of WordPress if stakeholders weren't able to make money? Would they have built it?
Right.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
A lot of what we've got today was built on wildly successful theme frameworks, plugins. I don't know, I was at WordCamp Boston in 2010, and I ended up with 2 coupon tickets to Gravity Forms. And I ended up with a 5-site lifetime license to Gravity Forms for free. And then another one that I got handed out got me the developer unlimited lifetime Gravity Forms license for like $25 or $50. It was some ridiculous thing. I still have that to today. Okay? And I never have to pay for this again. But that plugin, in many ways, with all the things I saw that had to be paid for, was the game changer, because everyone wanted that form builder. And then they took away the lifetime license, and you know what, people, as an option, they kept the people grandfathered in. People keep downloading it, they'll pay their $50 or $100 a year very happily to use that. So yeah, I don't think WordPress would have been as successful if there wasn't a way to market all of the code. And there's gray areas. There's a lot of gray areas. It's a great question. I gotta look up Delicious Brains now. I think that, but the more I'm hearing it, I'm like, if they trademarked the name of the company and the name of the plugin, how could they lose?
Right, well, then how does the GPL, so then I can't distribute the code, but I download a zip file, but I can't distribute that zip file.
Because it's got their
Because it's
trademark
got their name in it.
assets.
And so, to what degree do I need to take their name out? If they have their name in their hooks, do I need to go through and change all the hooks to take the name out? That point would be ridiculous. Right? I mean, so.
Okay, we're gonna have to leave that for the legal teams.
Okay, so, am I out of time?
You're out of time.
Okay, so I got one more thing.
One more thing.
So then, I cannot say, meet me at the happiness bar to discuss these nuances. But if, and all GPL questions should be talked about over a beer, a glass of wine, or anything, and that's where you can find me in a little bit.
6:30, the brewers, you're welcome to continue the conversation. Excellent job.
Thanks for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. This was fantastic for joining us the 4th year, and hope to see you again.
Are there closing remarks?
Closing remarks with Kim, yes, and then we can get going.
So.